The evening was alive with noise, the kind of noise that came from silverware clinking against plates, soft laughter from couples at nearby tables, and the warm hum of conversations filling the air. The restaurant stood like a gem in the middle of the city, known not only for its food but also for its atmosphere. The smell of freshly cooked meals drifted out from the kitchen, blending with the rich scent of roasted coffee beans and baked bread. Candlelight danced gently on every table, casting a soft golden glow that made the place feel both elegant and welcoming at the same time. Into this lively setting walked a man who carried himself with the kind of confidence that felt more like arrogance than ease. His shoes were polished so perfectly that they reflected the lights above, and his dark tailored suit looked like it had come straight from the hands of the world's most expensive designer. On his wrist, a luxury watch sparkled every time he moved his hand. He had the appearance of someone used to being noticed, someone who believed he was above the ordinary people around him. As he entered, his eyes scanned the room quickly, not with admiration but with judgment. He gave the impression that nothing in the restaurant would ever be good enough for him. His chin tilted slightly upward, as if the very act of looking straight ahead might lower his status. A hostess greeted him kindly, but he barely acknowledged her with more than a nod, as though offering a smile was beneath him. When he reached his table, he sat down with a heavy sigh, as if the simple act of sitting in this restaurant was already a compromise. People at nearby tables noticed him not because he smiled or carried warmth, but because of the way his presence demanded attention. He was the kind of person who wanted the world to know he was wealthy, powerful, and not to be questioned. A young waitress, dressed neatly in her crisp uniform, approached his table with a welcoming smile. Her steps were light and graceful, and her voice carried a tone of kindness as she greeted him and offered him the menu. She was professional, warm, and respectful, the way she treated every single guest who walked into the restaurant. Her presence was calming, and her smile carried sincerity that could make any guest feel at ease. But this man did not respond with the same courtesy. He barely glanced at her before rolling his eyes. Finally, he muttered, as if she had taken too long, even though she had come to his table almost instantly after he sat down. He looked her up and down in a way that suggested he thought she was beneath him. His lips curled slightly, not into a smile, but into something that looked like disapproval. The waitress, unshaken, continued her polite tone. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to our restaurant. Can I offer you some water to start?" The man waved his hand dismissively. "Just bring me sparkling water. And make sure it's chilled. Not room temperature. I don't want any mistakes." His words were sharp, almost cutting, as if he was speaking to someone who had already failed him. Nearby, a couple who had been quietly sipping wine exchanged a quick glance. They had seen the way he spoke to the waitress, and it made them uncomfortable. Still, the waitress simply nodded and responded with patience. "Of course, sir. Sparkling water, chilled. I'll be right back." Her voice remained calm, her expression professional, though inside she could feel the weight of his tone. When she left, the man leaned back in his chair, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through messages with an expression of boredom, occasionally sighing loudly, as if the entire restaurant should know how busy and important he was. His gold watch caught the light again, and he adjusted his cufflinks with unnecessary precision. The waitress soon returned with the water, placing it gently in front of him. She poured it carefully into the glass, making sure to respect the elegance he seemed to demand. Instead of thanking her, he frowned. "Didn't I say chilled? This doesn't feel cold enough," he remarked, touching the glass with his fingers. His voice carried loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I'll be happy to get you a fresh one with extra ice," she replied with patience, keeping her calm tone steady. "Humph," the man grunted, waving her away again. When she left, whispers floated through the nearby tables. Some shook their heads, while others pretended not to notice. But many eyes returned to the man, whose arrogance seemed to fill the room as much as the candlelight did. As the waitress walked back to the kitchen to fetch another bottle, she kept her composure. She had seen many different types of customers, those who were kind and grateful, and those who believed money gave them the right to treat others poorly. But she had also learned to remain steady, to never let someone's disrespect take away her peace. When she returned with the chilled bottle, she placed it again on the table, this time with extra ice. He tasted it, then gave a small nod, as if she had finally done something correctly. "Better," he muttered, without looking at her. The waitress, however, didn't let his behavior shake her. She gave the same polite smile and asked softly, "Would you like to see the menu, sir?" He finally looked up from his phone, his eyes narrowing as if judging her. "Do you even know what fine dining is?" he asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. "I don't want to waste my time with something average." His voice carried across the room again, loud enough to make the atmosphere slightly tense. Still, the waitress stood with dignity. "Our menu offers a range of carefully prepared dishes, sir. I'll be happy to guide you through the specialties of the day if you'd like." He smirked, leaning back in his chair. "We'll see," he said, as though he were granting her the chance to prove herself. Around them, guests tried to continue their meals, but many could not help glancing over. Some admired the waitress's calmness, while others silently judged the man's arrogance. But no one said a word. It was as if everyone in the restaurant was waiting, sensing that this encounter was only the beginning of something larger. For now, the man remained confident, sure of his superiority, while the waitress continued her service with quiet grace. He had no idea that the woman he was dismissing so easily was not just a waitress. She was the very heart of the restaurant, the person who had built it with her own hands, and the one who owned every single chair, every plate, and every light shining in the room. And while he thought he was in control of the night, the truth was that he had just stepped into a story that would soon turn his arrogance into silence. The wealthy man leaned back in his chair, his phone still in his hand, scrolling through messages as if he owned the world. His face carried a smug expression, the kind that made it clear he thought he was better than everyone around him. The waitress returned with the menu, placing it gently in front of him. She spoke kindly, introducing the chef's specials of the day, her voice warm and calm, even though she could feel his coldness pressing back at her. He picked up the menu with an exaggerated sigh, flipping through it like he was reading something beneath his standards. "Is this all you serve?" he asked loudly, making sure others nearby could hear his discontent. "I've eaten at the best restaurants in Paris, in London, in New York. This looks like a menu for average people." His tone dripped with disdain. The waitress, still patient, replied softly, "We take great pride in our dishes, sir. Each one is prepared with care, and I can assure you our ingredients are fresh and of the highest quality." He chuckled, shaking his head as though she had told a joke. "Do you even know what high quality is?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I suppose for people like you, this might seem impressive." His words cut like a blade, meant to belittle not only the restaurant but also her as a person. The waitress's heart felt a sting at his remark, but she had mastered the art of holding her head high. She answered with dignity, "Our guests usually enjoy their experience here. I'll be happy to recommend something that suits your taste." "Fine," he said, tossing the menu onto the table with a small thud. "What do you recommend? But make it something worth my time. I don't want anything cheap." Nearby, a young couple whispered quietly, clearly upset by the way he spoke to her. An older man at another table lowered his glass of wine and shook his head, muttering something under his breath. The wealthy man either did not notice or did not care. He was so used to acting superior that he assumed no one would ever challenge him. The waitress calmly recommended the chef's special, a tender steak with roasted vegetables and a rich sauce prepared fresh that evening. She described it with elegance, painting a picture of flavors that would satisfy anyone. But instead of appreciating her effort, the man smirked. Steak? Really? That's your best? I could get steak anywhere. Do you think I came here for something I could cook better at home? He snapped his fingers for attention. Bring me the most expensive dish you have. I don't care what it is, just make sure it looks fancy. I'm not here for comfort food. I'm here to eat something that proves I'm in a top restaurant. The snapping of his fingers echoed in the room, making several diners turn their heads. The sound carried the message that he saw her not as a human being, but as someone to command. The waitress nodded again, her smile unbroken, though her heart ached at the way he treated her. She turned gracefully and walked toward the kitchen, her shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. As she entered, one of the chefs noticed her expression. Another tough one, he asked gently. She gave a small smile. Something like that. But it's okay. I'll handle it. The chef shook his head. You've got the patience of a saint. Back at the table, the wealthy man leaned forward, whispering something to his companion, a business associate who had joined him for dinner. The man laughed, glancing at the waitress across the room, and made a comment that drew another smirk from the wealthy guest. Their laughter sounded hollow, filled with arrogance rather than joy. The waitress soon returned with bread and butter for the table, placing it gently before them. She moved with care, her posture straight, her presence professional. But once again, the wealthy man found a reason to complain. This bread looks dry, he said instantly, not even touching it. Don't you serve fresh baguettes here? In France, they would laugh at this. His voice was so loud that several customers paused mid-bite, exchanging uncomfortable looks. One woman whispered to her husband, "Why is he speaking to her like that? She's only doing her job." The waitress, keeping her composure, said softly, "I assure you it's baked fresh this afternoon, sir. But if you'd prefer something else, I'll be glad to bring it." He waved his hand dramatically. "Forget it. Just make sure my main course is not disappointing. I have very high standards." The waitress walked away once more, her heart steady but her mind reflecting on his words. She had dealt with rude customers before, but there was something sharper about this man's attitude. It was not just arrogance, it was the way he seemed to take pride in cutting others down. Still, she reminded herself of something her grandmother once told her: how people treat you is their story. How you respond is yours. She chose to keep her story one of dignity. As the night went on, the wealthy man grew louder. He joked about the decor, comparing it unfavorably to luxury restaurants he claimed to own shares in overseas. He spoke about his wealth, his travels, his cars, and his power. His voice carried across the restaurant, as if he wanted every single diner to know who he was. But what he didn't realize was that while he thought he was making himself look powerful, he was only making himself look small. The other diners grew more uncomfortable with each passing moment. Some whispered, others rolled their eyes, but none spoke out. The waitress returned again, this time to refill his glass. As she poured carefully, he looked at her and said with a smirk, "You must get tired serving tables every night. But then again, people like you don't really dream big, do you? This is probably the highlight of your career." The words were sharp, filled with mockery. For a brief second, her hand almost trembled, but she steadied herself. She simply smiled, meeting his eyes with quiet strength, and replied, "Everyone's story is bigger than it looks, sir." He scoffed. "We'll see." The night continued in the same rhythm. He insulted the food before it even arrived, bragged about his wealth, and treated the waitress as though she were invisible except when she needed to serve him. Yet through it all, she held her ground with a smile, never letting his arrogance break her spirit. What no one at his table knew and what he least expected was that the woman he believed was beneath him was not just serving the restaurant. She was the one who built it. She was the owner who had invested her life, her savings, and her heart into this place. She had faced challenges he could not imagine, had fought battles silently, and had risen stronger every single time. And while he mocked her for being just a waitress, the truth was waiting to be revealed. A truth that would soon turn his arrogance into shame and silence. The stage was set. The wealthy man believed he was in control, but the balance of power was about to shift in a way that would leave him frozen in disbelief. The restaurant's warmth and soft lighting were meant to make every guest feel welcome, but at one table, the tension had grown thick. The wealthy man continued to make his presence known, not in a pleasant way but in a manner that drained the comfort from those seated around him. His laughter was loud and sharp, his voice carried with arrogance, and every sentence seemed to be sprinkled with insults aimed at the waitress who had been nothing but kind to him since he walked through the door. The food was finally brought out, plated beautifully with delicate garnishes. The chef had taken special care, knowing this man had already been difficult. The waitress approached carefully, balancing the plates with grace. She placed the steak in front of him, the vegetables roasted to perfection, the sauce rich and fragrant. The dish was made to impress, but even before he touched his fork, the wealthy man found fault. He leaned forward, sniffed the air, and shook his head. This is supposed to be your best dish? It looks ordinary." His voice was loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. He picked up his knife, cut a small piece, and tasted it with exaggerated slowness. His face twisted dramatically. As I thought. It's average at best. I could have my personal chef make something far better in half the time." The waitress stayed calm, though her stomach tightened. She knew the chef had worked hard, and she herself had carefully presented the dish. "I'm sorry it's not to your liking, sir," she said politely. "Would you like me to suggest something else from the menu?" He waved his hand as if swatting away a fly. "Don't bother. I'll eat this because I don't like wasting food, but honestly, I expected better. You should really tell your manager to raise the standards here. If this is what you call fine dining, you're fooling yourselves." Other diners exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A woman whispered to her husband, "He's embarrassing himself more than anyone else." The man at her table nodded, agreeing quietly. But the wealthy guest seemed unaware that his behavior was drawing judgment from every corner of the room. As the waitress moved to step away, he snapped his fingers again. The sound was sharp, and it made her stop. He leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on his watch as though showing it off. "And while you're at it," he said, "make sure my wine glass is never empty. I don't want to keep asking. That's what good service is about." She nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure your glass is refilled." For the next hour, the same cycle repeated itself. Every time she approached his table, he found a way to cut her down with his words. When she refilled his glass, he muttered that she was slow. When she checked on the food, he remarked that she looked inexperienced. When she smiled, he questioned if she even understood what real hospitality meant. The other staff began to notice more and more. They whispered to each other in the kitchen, concern growing on their faces. "He's really pushing her," one waiter murmured. "I don't know how she stays so calm." Another server shook her head. "She always does. She has a strength most of us don't." Back at the table, the wealthy man started bragging again to his companion. "In Dubai, I stayed at a hotel where the staff knew who I was before I even walked in. That's the level of service I expect. Not this, basic treatment." He glanced around the restaurant, his eyes landing on the waitress once more. "Here, it feels like they let anyone serve. Honestly, do you think she even has proper training? She probably just walked in off the street." His companion gave a nervous laugh, unsure if he should agree or stay silent. The wealthy man didn't wait for an answer. He continued talking about his investments, his properties, and the deals he had closed, as if every person in the restaurant should be honored to hear his stories. The waitress, meanwhile, continued her rounds. She checked on other tables, gave warm smiles, and made sure every guest felt valued. The contrast was clear. While one man tried to pull the atmosphere down with arrogance, she lifted it with kindness. Many guests noticed this and admired her strength, silently rooting for her. The wealthy man, however, seemed determined to test her patience further. As she returned with a fresh bottle of water, he leaned forward and asked in a mocking tone, "Tell me something. Do you enjoy this? Serving people like me? Doesn't it bother you, knowing that while you work here night after night, people like me are out living the real life?" His words were meant to sting, but the waitress did not flinch. She set the bottle down gently, met his eyes, and said softly, "I enjoy making people feel welcome, sir. That's why I do this." He laughed loudly, a laugh that felt hollow. "Well, that's one way to look at it. But trust me, you should aim higher. You'll never get anywhere serving tables your whole life." The irony of his words hung heavy in the air. The other diners, now fully aware of his attitude, looked at the waitress with sympathy and respect. They had no idea yet who she really was, but they could sense there was something unshakable about her. As the evening pressed on, his demands grew. He wanted the music turned down, even though no one else complained. He wanted his dish reheated, even though he had barely touched it. He asked for sauces that weren't on the menu, expecting the staff to bend to his will. Every time he spoke, his arrogance filled the room. At one point, he even said loudly to his companion, "If I owned this place, half of these people would be fired on the spot. Especially her. She's too slow, too simple. Not what I'd call fine service." The words reached the waitress's ears, but still, she held her composure. She had promised herself never to meet rudeness with rudeness. She had built her life on patience, and she would not let one man's arrogance steal that from her. But the staff knew something the wealthy man did not. They knew who she really was. Some of them exchanged glances, their lips curling into quiet smiles, almost amused by the scene playing out. They wondered how long it would take before the truth came to light. The wealthy man, however, was completely blind to it. He was too caught up in his own world, too wrapped in his belief that money made him superior. He had no idea that the person he was mocking was not just a waitress. She was the one who signed their paychecks. She was the one who designed the very atmosphere he criticized. She was the one who could, with a single word, decide whether he stayed or left. And yet, she chose to remain silent for now. The diners grew restless, sensing something was about to change. The way she carried herself, the way the staff looked at her, and the way his arrogance had reached its peak all seemed to point toward an unseen turning point. The wealthy man believed he was untouchable, but he was about to discover the truth. The room was filled with quiet tension, the kind that lingered before a storm. Every eye was on the scene, every ear listening to the sharp words he continued to throw. But the moment was coming when the balance would shift, when his pride would meet reality. And it would happen in a way he never saw coming. The wealthy man's arrogance had reached its peak. For nearly 2 hours, he had belittled the food, mocked the staff, and spoken to the waitress as if she were invisible or unworthy of basic respect. His laughter echoed through the restaurant every time he made a cruel remark, and though some guests tried to ignore him, many watched with growing discomfort. The waitress continued to serve him with patience, never raising her voice, never showing anger. She kept her calm smile, her graceful posture, and her professional tone. But behind her calm eyes, she knew something he didn't. The moment of truth was near. The wealthy man finished his plate, pushing it away with exaggerated disgust. "Honestly," he said loudly, "I don't know why anyone comes here. The service is poor, the food is mediocre, and the staff clearly don't know what fine dining is. If this place was in New York or Paris, it wouldn't last a week. His companion shifted uncomfortably in his chair, finally sensing that the other diners were glaring at them. But the wealthy man didn't care. He lifted his glass, drained it, and snapped his fingers one more time. "Where's that waitress? She should be here immediately. Do I have to wait all night just for proper service?" The room fell silent. It wasn't just irritation anymore, people were waiting. They could feel that something was about to happen. The waitress approached his table, her calm smile still in place, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "How may I help you?" He leaned back, smirking. "Finally. Took you long enough. Bring me the manager. I want to make a complaint. This restaurant is far below the standards I'm used to, and I don't think I should be paying for this kind of experience. Maybe if the manager hears from someone of my status, they'll improve. Or maybe they'll realize who they're dealing with." The waitress stood straight, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She took a small breath, then spoke in a voice that was gentle but carried through the room. "You don't need to wait for the manager, sir. I am the manager." The wealthy man froze for a second, blinking in confusion. "You?" He let out a sharp laugh, but it sounded nervous. "Don't be ridiculous. You're just a waitress. Where's the real manager? Call him out here." She did not flinch. "I am the manager," she repeated, her voice steady. "And more than that, I am the owner of this restaurant." The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. Every single diner in the room turned their eyes to the table. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Glasses hovered in midair. Even the music from the speakers seemed to fade. The wealthy man's smirk disappeared, replaced with disbelief. His hand, still resting on his expensive watch, trembled slightly. "Owner," he whispered, as if the word itself was impossible. "Yes," she said, nodding gently. "This restaurant is mine. Every chair, every plate, every detail in this place, I built it. I may choose to serve on the floor some nights, but that doesn't change who I am." The man's companion cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable, sinking back into his chair. He avoided eye contact, sensing the embarrassment thick in the air. The wealthy man tried to recover, but his words came out shaky. You should have said so earlier. I didn't realize. I thought you were just..." He stopped himself, realizing the weight of his own words. "Just a waitress," she finished for him, her tone still calm but sharp enough to pierce the air. "Does that make someone less worthy of respect? Should kindness only be given to people who own restaurants, wear suits, or have wealth?" His face flushed red. He looked down at the table, fiddling with his napkin, unable to meet her eyes. For the first time that night, he was silent. Around them, a wave of quiet murmurs filled the room. Some diners smiled, others shook their heads in disbelief at his arrogance. A few even began to clap softly, their admiration for the waitress turned owner growing by the second. The wealthy man cleared his throat again, searching for words. I didn't mean any disrespect. You know how it is. Long day, stress, too much business to handle." But his excuses sounded weak, even to himself. The diners didn't buy it, and neither did she. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady and calm. "Respect doesn't cost anything, sir. It shouldn't depend on the kind of day you've had, or on the status of the person in front of you. Every person who walks into this restaurant, whether guest or staff, deserves to be treated with dignity." Her words hung in the air like a lesson written on the walls. They were not spoken with anger, but with wisdom, and that made them even more powerful. The wealthy man sat frozen, his earlier arrogance gone. His hands, which had been so quick to snap fingers and wave dismissively, now rested quietly on the table. His voice, which had filled the room with insults, was gone. All that remained was silence and shame. His companion leaned in, whispering, "Maybe we should just leave." But the wealthy man didn't move right away. His pride was shattered, but he couldn't bring himself to stand. He looked around the room, seeing the stares of the other diners. Some were shaking their heads at him. Others were smiling proudly at the owner. He had become the center of attention, but not in the way he liked. The waitress, the owner, gave him one final look, her expression calm but firm. "You may enjoy your evening, sir, if you wish to stay. But in this restaurant, respect is part of the service. And it goes both ways." The words were clear, final, and impossible to argue with. The man lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping slightly. He muttered something under his breath, but it wasn't loud enough for anyone to hear. For the first time that night, he looked small, not powerful. The other diners, however, could not stay quiet. A few clapped louder this time, their applause filling the restaurant. Others nodded in approval, their smiles wide. The energy of the room shifted completely. The cold tension was replaced by warmth, respect, and admiration for the woman who had stood with such quiet strength. The wealthy man felt the eyes burning into him. He had come in expecting to be admired, but he was leaving humiliated. And all of it was his own doing. The waitress owner gave a small bow of her head to the room before stepping away from his table. She didn't need to say more. Her truth had already spoken louder than anything else could. The wealthy man remained frozen in his seat, his face pale. For once, he had nothing left to say. The restaurant was no longer filled with laughter from the wealthy man. Instead, it carried a new energy, one of respect and admiration for the woman who had stood with quiet strength and revealed the truth about herself. Guests whispered to each other, their eyes shining with pride for her. The applause that had started softly now faded into a warm silence, the kind of silence where people didn't need to speak because the message had already been made clear. The wealthy man sat stiff in his chair, his shoulders slouched, his head slightly lowered. The smug expression that had lived on his face for most of the evening had completely disappeared. His hand rested on the table, no longer tapping impatiently or adjusting his expensive watch to show off. For the first time since he had entered, he looked like any other man, small, embarrassed, and unsure of himself. His companion leaned in quietly, whispering, "We should leave. It's better to just go." But leaving was not so simple. The man could feel the weight of the stares pressing against him from all around the room. Every person who had witnessed his arrogance now saw him in a new light, not as a powerful figure, but as someone who had been humbled. His pride had been stripped away in front of strangers, and his mind raced with excuses, but none seemed strong enough to undo what had already been said. The waitress owner, standing tall in her neat uniform, walked calmly to another table to check on a family who had been dining quietly all evening. She asked if everything was to their liking, and they smiled warmly, nodding with admiration in their eyes. She moved with the same grace she had shown all night, her dignity unshaken, her heart steady. It was as if nothing could touch her peace, not even the cruel words of a man who believed himself above others. The wealthy man watched her, his lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. He had insulted her again and again, treating her as if she were beneath him. Now he knew she was the very person who had built this place, the one who made it all possible. The realization burned inside him, and shame pressed heavily against his chest. Finally, he stood, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound was sharp in the quiet room, drawing even more attention to him. He cleared his throat awkwardly, tugging at his jacket. I think we'll be going now," he muttered to his companion. But before he could leave, the owner returned to his table, her calm expression unchanged. She spoke softly, so everyone could hear but without raising her voice. "Sir, You are welcome to leave if you wish, but before you go, I want to say something. The man froze, his eyes darting to her. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, unable to find his usual arrogance. She folded her hands in front of her and spoke with steady confidence. Every person deserves respect. Whether they are serving food, cleaning floors, managing an office, or running a company, respect should not depend on status. Tonight, you treated me as if I was less than you because you thought I was a waitress. But now you know the truth. And the truth is, even if I were only a waitress, I would still deserve your kindness. The diners listened closely, some nodding, others looking directly at the wealthy man. The air was thick with the weight of her words, and they landed with more power than any insult ever could. The wealthy man swallowed hard, his face pale. He tried to form a reply, but his voice cracked slightly. "You're right," he admitted softly, almost to himself. "You're right. I was wrong." The words felt heavy coming from his mouth. He had never been the type to admit mistakes, but in this moment, he could not deny the truth staring back at him. The owner gave him a gentle nod, not with malice but with a kind of grace that made the moment even more powerful. "I hope you carry this lesson with you," she said. "Because money, status, or pride mean very little if you cannot treat people with decency." She then stepped back, allowing him the chance to leave with what little dignity he had left. The wealthy man looked around once more, his eyes meeting those of the diners who had witnessed everything. Their expressions told him all he needed to know. They were not impressed by his wealth or his suit. They were impressed by her. She had won their respect, and he had lost theirs. Slowly, he turned and walked toward the exit, his companion following close behind. No one clapped this time. No one spoke to him. The silence itself was enough. Each step he took toward the door felt heavier than the last, until finally, the door closed behind him, and the restaurant exhaled in relief. The owner took a deep breath and turned to the guests. With a warm smile, she addressed the room. "I'm sorry for the disturbance tonight. I hope you all continue to enjoy your evening." Her voice carried sincerity, and immediately, several diners began clapping again, this time for her. The sound filled the restaurant with warmth, washing away the bitterness of the man's behavior. Some guests even stood to applaud, their faces bright with admiration. She bowed her head slightly, humbled by their support, then returned to her duties as though nothing extraordinary had happened. That was her way: quiet strength, steady dignity, and a heart that never allowed arrogance to win. In the kitchen, the staff gathered briefly, their faces glowing with pride. "You handled that perfectly," one of the chefs said. "I don't know how you stay so calm." She smiled. "Because anger doesn't teach lessons. But kindness does. Sometimes silence, sometimes calm words, that's what makes people reflect." The rest of the night flowed peacefully. Guests enjoyed their meals, conversations grew lively again, and the atmosphere returned to what it had always been: warm, elegant, and welcoming. Yet, in the back of every mind, the memory of what they had witnessed remained strong. Some guests left that evening with more than just the taste of fine food. They left with a story about humility, kindness, and the truth that respect should never be measured by wealth. They would tell their families, their friends, and perhaps even strangers about the waitress who was really the owner, and the wealthy man who was humbled before her. As for the wealthy man, his drive home was silent. For the first time in a long time, he had no words to boast, no pride to carry, and no audience to impress. All he had was the echo of her words in his mind: "Even if I were only a waitress, I would still deserve your kindness." He realized that night that wealth without respect was empty, and arrogance without humility was a weakness, not a strength. It was a lesson he would never forget. The restaurant continued to thrive in the weeks and months that followed, not just because of its food or decor, but because of the story that spread about the owner who served her customers with grace, and the wealthy man who learned that true value lies not in status, but in character. And every evening, when the owner walked through her restaurant, some guests recognized her, smiled, and whispered the story to newcomers. She would only smile in return, quietly reminding herself that the best victories are not loud. They are the ones that happen when dignity defeats arrogance.